Welcome to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast, where we cut through the noise and help you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff Somke. On this episode, I'm joined once again by journalist and author Chris Mathias. Chris has been reporting from the front lines of the fight against white nationalism in America for years now, and he's got a new book coming out in February entitled To Catch a Fascist. I'm really excited to get the chance to speak with him today. Stick around.
This isn't the working class rising up. This is the ruling class punching down.
My day bigger than your day.
First rule of gladiator school, bro. Don't punch down.
Charging into a goblin.
Hail Trump!
The threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within.
Control your own body.
We will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
We can fight the entire grinding system. Nobody can get together. Everybody can.
I did nothing wrong.
Chris, welcome back to Did Nothing Wrong. It's been way too long since we've had you on.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, when was that? It was over a year ago.
Episode 105 was the previous
Okay.
episode. So it's been a minute since we've had you on. The world is a very different
And nothing's
place.
nothing's happened.
Nothing
since then.
happened at
Yeah.
all. It's just time just stopped. We haven't
Yeah.
done anything. You don't want to know about the election. You don't want to know about how that all came down. It's kind of depressing. I did see that you have the book finished. The book that you were working on, that you were telling us about the last time you were here. It's called To Catch a Fascist, and it seems like you're done.
Yeah, unbelievably, it's finally done. I turned in the final draft, did the copy edit, the fact check, the legal review.
Wow.
So it will be out in February. You can pre-order now on Simon & Schuster.
Absolutely pre-order this thing on Simon & Schuster, like right now.
Yeah.
Go do
Yeah.
that. We'll wait.
Go
We'll
do
hang
it.
out. We'll hang out. So I'll bet legal review for something like this was extensive. I'll bet you really had to go through some hoops for this.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's from my experience at HuffPost and other publications, whenever you are labeling someone a Nazi and especially exposing someone as a Nazi that
Mhm.
is synonymous, there's a lot of liability there if you get it wrong.
Yes.
So yeah, this legal review is definitely, tedious. Took probably 6 or 7 hours with the lawyers.
Right.
But very, very good and thorough.
Nice. Nice.
And I feel good about it.
Yeah, last time we talked, you were in the middle of writing it. You were kind of putting some stuff together. You had, basically, I think most of it done at that point. You were just sort of filling in details and putting it all together. And I'm glad you got a release date. I'm very, very excited to read this. And like you said, nothing much really changed in the world when you were writing, so you didn't miss much being all isolated. It's weird because since then, the world seems like it's kind of turned completely upside down. And all of a sudden, we're literally doing every bad thing that every one of us predicted was going to happen if the election went that way.
Yeah.
And did you end up having to change the focus of certain parts of the book? Anything change as a result of that election?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually turned in the first draft of the book. The due date was Inauguration Day.
Oh, God.
So I was literally writing the final paragraph and had the TV on and saw Elon Musk do the salutes.
Oh, no.
So it was a pretty fitting final day to the first draft. I actually ended up calling a couple anti-fascist activists to get their reaction in real time. But I actually ended up, that was in the last chapter, but I ended up going in a different direction in the last chapter, which I guess I can talk about now.
Yeah. Go ahead.
But basically, a good part of the book is about a anti-fascist activist that goes undercover into Patriot Front. And so I like to pitch it as an anti-fascist spy thriller.
Right.
He, as I'm sure you're aware, eventually gets a hold of their rocket chat messages, 440 gigabytes of them, and they end up on Unicorn Riot, and about 80 members of Patriot Front end up getting doxxed or unmasked.
Wow. Good work.
So that's kind of Yeah.
Well
So that's kind
done.
of yeah. So that's like one of the main narratives of the book. But what I ended up doing for the last chapter is interviewing someone that used to be in Patriot Front, but has since started the process of leaving white nationalism behind them.
Oh, that's great.
And yeah, and one of the more striking things about that interview and why I thought it was a fitting coda to the book is that he's essentially looking around at the Trump administration, hearing Trump speak, and it sounds like a Patriot Front speech.
Yeah.
He's seeing ICE agents wearing khaki cargo pants and masks, and they look like Patriot Front members. He's seeing in California ICE members turning up to a Home Depot to arrest immigrants in the back of a like Penske box rental truck, which is a Patriot Front tactic.
Some other people do that too.
Yeah. So he's basically, someone who is immersed in these fascist spaces is all of a sudden seeing it mainstreamed to a really big degree.
Right.
So that was, after seeing Musk do the salute and seeing everything that happened in the couple months in the second draft, I decided to change the kind of the ending of the book. And I hope that's not giving too much away. But
well, I mean, the world is a very different place that we were in when we talked to you before. And all of a sudden, it's like the whole thing is down is up. And you're right about the like very, very amazing resemblance between Patriot Front and what ICE is wearing when they go out on these missions. And I don't know how much of that is intentional, but it's the kind of thing that sparked a whole lot of rumors in the beginning of the ICE crackdown. People were saying, oh, these guys are Proud Boys or these guys are Patriot Front. They're just putting on masks and they're going out and doing that. And while I think the administration would probably hire any of these guys that could pass a background check from those groups, I think that that's one that they sort of whiffed on because nobody ever really proved that any of these people were actually working or members of any of these groups. But nobody on that side of the fence was too bummed that people thought that was what was going on.
Totally. And I think it's, I agree, like there's no evidence that Patriot Front and Proud Boy members are in ICE, but like, and
not
I think
that I put it past them or anything. I mean, I think they would.
Yeah,
do that.
yeah.
I just don't know that they have.
And I think like that kind of idea that like this speculation online is a bit of wish casting because it actually kind of hides a much scarier proposal, which is, or reality, which is that the people in ICE committing this white nationalist project are not, they're just everyday people that are your neighbors. And,
they're not the ones you knew about. They're not the ones you see, in the news. They're not the ones you see getting hauled out of a U-Haul truck in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho and photographed. You're dealing with people that may have been your next door neighbor up until very recently. And you don't understand that, oh my God, that guy really always felt that way. And now he's in between jobs and he's got an opportunity to go work for ICE and he's probably going to go off and do it. I mean, Patriot Front are one of those groups, and that's why it's interesting that, you're writing about them, that I'm honestly a little surprised caught on. The leader is a guy named Thomas Rousseau, if you're not familiar, and he is very, very much a control freak from everything I've read. He has to have like operational control of practically everything they're doing, down to the uniforms, down to the U-Haul trucks that they've used. And I'm kind of surprised that just hasn't fallen over on him because he's a relatively young guy, right? He's only like 24 or 25.
Yeah, he's remarkably young. He's like Fuentes,
right.
And like him and Fuentes were both in Charlottesville together, and we're kind of these like young, up and coming
generation
people in the movement. Yeah, and now they're pretty big deals. But I think this is something that I thought a lot about for the book, and like anti-fascists had a lot of success in the Trump era in destroying like white supremacist groups, white nationalist groups.
Right.
So like after Charlottesville, there had been an anti-fascist spy in the Charlottesville planning server on Discord. That like, however many thousands gigabytes of data was then used by researchers to identify and unmask like hundreds of people that were in Charlottesville.
Right.
all those messages were then put into Signs v. Kessler, the kind of like big lawsuit against all the organizers of Charlottesville.
Filed, yeah.
Yeah, and that ended up destroying a lot of the groups there. National Socialist Movement, League of the South, Vanguard America, rebranded to
Traditionalist
become
Workers'
Patriot
Party,
Front.
all these people ended up with like massive legal judgments, and they didn't want to deal with that.
Yeah,
So they ended up having to rebrand
exactly.
if they were going to stick around.
Yeah, exactly. And then, in 2019, you had another mass doxing event when another anti-fascist spy infiltrated Identity Europa, which was, this kind of suit and tie fascist group that was, having some real success making inroads with the Republican Party.
Oh, yeah. They definitely were.
So after this spy gets all their messages, again, they end up on a open source database on Unicorn Riot, and 100 of their members get doxxed, and Identity Europa eventually folds. With Patriot Front, it's a different story. Like in 2021, 2022, same thing happens. This spy infiltrates their group. His infiltration is special because he does an in-person infiltration. He's like in the group for 6 months, and he's going on missions. He's going on hikes. He's attending meetings. Because you have to in Patriot Front in order to stay in that group.
Mm-hmm.
And again, at the end, he comes away with all this data. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of doxes of these guys, but Patriot Front, manages to stay alive. And I think part of that is what we've already touched on, which is kind of the mainstreaming of white nationalism and, kind of the animating question of my book, which is that, doxing, anti-fascist doxing, leverages a existing societal taboo against explicit fascism or explicit white supremacy to create a social consequence for being a fascist, right? So like, if I identify you as a fascist, you might lose your job, you might lose your girlfriend, you might, your family might, be ashamed of you. And it's like a very good way to prevent people from joining these movements and to like creating consequences for being a fascist. But the animating question in the book becomes, what happens when that taboo starts to disappear?
Right. And I think we're at that point where there just isn't that same sense of taboo. I mean, when you can take stuff that, where I committed this is back in 2015 and 2016, realizing that the stuff the Republican Party was saying out loud at that point was very much starting to resemble Stormfront. And I was trying to figure out the answer to the question of how did we go from this stuff being only talked about in a very small circle amongst awful racists to the top end of the Republican Party having these opinions? How did that get mainstreamed? Who brought that in? And I think we've kind of seen now that side of things, you mentioned, Identity Europa, that was back when they were in there. We are trying to be very respectable. And we've had some people, Samantha from Identity Europa, who was their women's coordinator. We had her on the show. We've had, Evan McLaren, who was also with Richard Spencer during Charlottesville. And they talk about that being such an explicit aim of that movement, is to go in and make it something that normie Republicans could agree with and endorse without necessarily being criticized by all their, their contemporaries as being complete racists. But it seems like they didn't quite get that. They didn't quite get there. People started explaining it a little too soon, what those people were about. And that's the most, I think, amazing part of the last few years on a lot of levels, is that the authorities really haven't done a whole bunch about this. The powers that be haven't done a whole lot. And a lot of what's happened has been as a result of anti-fascists going out there, spying in the groups, doing that undercover work, and then getting the names out. And I think that that's probably hurt them, far worse than anything the government's done at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the public, in the public imagination, it's the government and law enforcement that goes undercover into white supremacist groups.
Yeah,
and that is true. Like, that definitely happens. And this is because of movies like Black Klansman and Imperium and other other stuff like that. But I do think there's a real argument that over the last 10 years, it was anti-fascists doing the bulk of espionage and of intelligence gathering and unmasking. I ended up for the book putting together a spreadsheet or database of 1,000 doxes that anti-fascists published since 2015, which is an incomplete sampling. It's
sure.
But it's just still breathtaking though. And I made like a column for all of the Nazis they exposed, like what jobs those Nazis had. So all of a sudden you're able to see like how many police officers and teachers and and like local politicians and so forth. But I wanted to touch on something you were getting at in 25. You're talking about like watching Stormfront become part of the Republican Party. So obviously my book is about unmasking, right? It's about how all these Nazis still feel the need to wear a mask or use a fake name when they are pushing this stuff. And I think there was this narrative after Charlottesville that the alt-right was defeated, but I think in a way they kind of served their purpose. They were like a vanguard or like shock troops to like put all this shit and mainstream all this shit. And I think one of the most interesting parts of the book for me, like reporting and researching it, was actually thinking about the first and second Ku Klux Klan. So you had, which was kind of a similar dynamic where, the first Klan forms after the Civil War in the South, and they are essentially fighting Reconstruction.
Right?
Yeah. And eventually, after a few years, they do such a good job that they're kind of not needed anymore and they disappear because all of a sudden, Reconstruction's abandoned and we're, ushered into an era of lynching and Jim Crow and official segregation. And so, they kind of traded the anonymity of their hood for the anonymity of the lynch mob.
Right.
You fast forward to the 1920s, second Klan emerges and is absolutely massive. Like I kind of forgot like how big they are. Millions and millions of members, take over state governments, like including in Oregon.
Oh, including in Washington. People think that
Washington
this is
too.
like a liberal utopia out here, and it always has been. If you go 75 miles north of Seattle, there's a town called Bellingham, which is a perfectly wonderful little college town. Lots of hippies, nice place. But in Bellingham, they had a Klan rally during that era. I think it was 1921, and they got 12,000 people show up at a Klan rally in front of everybody.
Yeah.
And that was hardly an isolated incident. There were lots of Klan up in that area and in Seattle.
No, yeah, totally. And like it's wild looking at the Linda Gordon's book, The Second Coming of the Klan's amazing, and it has
I'm gonna have to
all
read
these, and it has all these photos of Klansmen like holding like festivals, like fairs. There's actually it's like darkly funny, but there's like a photo of all these like hooded Klansmen on a Ferris wheel at at a festival. It's so surreal. But at any rate, the reason I bring up the second Klan is that like although and part of the the story I tell for the first and second Klan is about the spies of that era that go undercover into the Klan to fuck their shit up. Most grippingly, I think in the second Klan in Buffalo, New York, there was a big effort, like a coalition between the local Jewish population, the Black population, and the Catholic population, because the second Klan is very anti-Catholic. Yeah, and they get a spy. The mayor is Catholic, and he enlists a Catholic police officer to go undercover in the Klan. He ends up finding their secret headquarters. One night, the secret headquarters gets broken into. The membership list of 20,000 Klans members is stolen. And they bring the mayor, after some deft denials about involvement in the break-in, posts the list of all 20,000 members downtown. And then, so for the next weeks, there's a lines down the block of Buffalo residents going to check out this list to see which of their neighbors are in the Klan.
Who do you know on this list?
Yeah, and so it begins this, it creates this new social arrangement where there's a lot of shame for being in the Klan. The Buffalo Klan eventually disbands, and and the second Klan goes into decline too. But what the point Linda Gordon makes in her book is that although they declined, a lot of what they fought for ended up going mainstream. The Immigration Act that restricted, created quotas for where immigrants could come from came out of the Klan. All these eugenicist policies came out of the Klan and were mainstreamed. And it is interesting today when you think about Stephen Miller types, and
Oh yeah,
they want that Immigration Act from the 1920s again, which was named after a Klansman.
We
So-
had Katie McHugh on the show, who we used to work directly for Stephen Miller. And one of the things
Right.
she told me, and this won't surprise you at all, is that every morning Stephen Miller gets a list delivered to him of every Latino last name that hit a police blotter anywhere in this country. And so they go through that list and they make sure that some of these people, this is in the Breitbart days, are going to see Breitbart that day. They would just go through every Latino crime or anybody who's been accused of a crime that's Latino that they could find and, write some stories about it. And Miller did that kind of stuff for years. So really, when he's got arguably one of the most powerful positions in this government, I wouldn't be all that terribly surprised if we find out he's running a lot of things right now, that this is what he's going to do. That the deportation squads, that ICE acting like this is the kind of thing anybody who was paying attention could see Stephen Miller doing if he ever got the chance. It's definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you're right that he is the guy pulling the strings right now and setting policy. I don't think Trump has any real interest in actually.
Yeah, it's just not his thing. He wants to get paid and make speeches and yell at people.
Exactly.
And he's doing that.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's wild how, Mike Hayden and Katie McHugh did such a good job at ringing the alarm bell about Miller years ago. And I don't think it got enough attention at the time.
No, it didn't.
Yeah. And I think, I don't want to get your podcast sued or anything, but I think he can comfortably be labeled a white nationalist.
I have no problem saying I think Stephen Miller is a white nationalist based on his behavior and based on the things that he has not only said, but done. I absolutely think Stephen Miller is shooting towards the goal of a white nation. And for all those people who are going to be like, herder, he's Jewish. It's like, he doesn't see himself as anything other than white. Bet you money.
Yeah.
He's one of those people that he's a white guy. The rest of it's irrelevant. And he wants that to be the country he lives in. He's made that very, very clear over the years that this is what he's all about. So I think he's a white nationalist. Definitely. I don't.
Oh no, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
He absolutely is. And I remember once back in 2017, I covered a Richard Spencer rally at the University of Florida.
Okay.
And
that.
Yeah. And afterwards I ended up going back to all the Identity Europa guys and National Policy Institute guys, and Richard Spencer had gotten this big Airbnb in the middle of the Florida countryside near Williston, Florida. So I drove out there. I still can't believe I did this without any security. It's like the Wild West. But went there and interviewed Spencer, and I asked him about his relationship with Stephen Miller when they were both at Duke. And I will never forget Richard Spencer's response to me was, "I don't want to get him in trouble." So that should tell you something about Stephen Miller.
I mean, that says it all. That totally says it all. And, we've all speculated. We're like, they knew each other at Duke. I wonder what they did. I wonder if those guys hung out. And it's like, don't want to get him in trouble. It's like, oh.
Yeah. Something going on with Duke, man. A lot of far right weird
Darren
dudes
Beatty as well, man. I think I'm calling for a full shutdown till we can investigate Duke and find out what's going on. Seriously.
Find out what's going on. Yeah.
We need to know. And, I'm really glad that this book is coming out soon, because right now this is a very, very opportune time with the recent executive order that Trump signed. I mean, this has kind of been a pipe dream of theirs ever since at least 2017, when a troll who is no longer anonymous by the name of Microchip put a freaking petition up saying that Trump needed to do this. This was back in 2017. And here we are, 2025, and Trump has actually done this. And I'm sure that guy is on his park bench really happy about all of this at this point. But it feels like the culmination of this project that they've been working on to get something called Antifa declared as a terrorist organization. And we've talked about this. This isn't possible. And it's not something that under the normal rules of the system would even be something worth talking about because it's so implausible. Why is that?
Why is it implausible?
Yeah. Why can't they do it?
Well, yeah, there is no domestic terror statute. The federal government can't designate domestic groups as terrorists. The only groups that they can designate as terrorists are foreign groups.
Right.
So the only way that the federal government is going to charge Americans for terrorism, for the most part, is for them doing some kind of material support for a foreign terrorist organization.
Right.
So, you know, and I think there's some very good reasons for not having a domestic terror statute because for
it
exactly
will get
this
turned
reason.
on your side. This is the reason right now.
Yeah, because like if, for example, we had designated, whatever white supremacist group a few years back.
Yeah. Say we designate Patriot Front. Say Patriot Front gets designated. They've earned it. To a large extent.
But that will open up to when a right-wing administration comes into power, they're going to start designating
anybody they don't like.
Anyone they don't like a terrorist organization. So I think when you read Trump's designation, someone had a good tweet about this, but it's basically like it has no real legal effect, but
right.
what it essentially boils down to is Trump screaming that Antifa is really bad and he wants law enforcement to look at them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as bullshit as it is legally, however, it's still scary because it's like a big rhetorical escalation that cements in people's minds that anti-fascists, Antifa, are outside the realm of political respectability, which makes them vulnerable to vigilante violence and to state persecution. Like law enforcement will, even though Antifa is not, there's no domestic terror statute, that doesn't mean law enforcement isn't going to listen to Trump and start trying to investigate Antifa or what they think is Antifa. And I think that this is the scariest part, is that the right doesn't know what the fuck Antifa is, and they have this very expansive definition of it. So eventually it always becomes anyone they don't like or they deem a little too radical for their liking, they will label Antifa.
And we saw an example of that in Atlanta with the Cop City protests and the Cop City protesters. We had Kelly Weil on at one point and we talked about this, the idea that basically they went in and charged anybody who was supporting the Cop City protests in Atlanta, which was against the big police training facility that was being built. The community came out in its numbers and basically shut this thing down. They didn't like that as a result, and they charged almost everybody involved in it that they could find. If you donated $5 to one of these groups, we had people get indicted for that. We had people get indicted for mutual aid. We got people indicted for postings, and they tried to make it a RICO case. Now, this will probably get thrown out of court. A lot of it already has, but the problem is when these people are running things, this is the kind of stuff they're going to do. And as we've seen with the Supreme Court being what it is, they're not going to get a whole lot of pushback if it goes that far. The Supreme Court's going to be like, well, okay, Trump said it, I believe it, that settles it, no problem. And I think that I want to touch on something that you said. To them, Antifa is anyone they don't like. Anyone who is, potentially active on the left in politics that they're not into. It's everybody from like people like us to, even as far as like Bill Kristol at this point. They see anybody like that. And they have, I think, and this is just my personal theory, but I think they do this because they can't conceive of an organization like this that doesn't have an organizational structure at all. To them, if 3 people are in the group, they're all going to have titles. You're going to have a president, a vice president, and a sergeant at arms. That's how righty groups work because they're all kind of order freaks. They need to have that structure. So even if there's only a few people, they're all going to have titles. I mean, look at Patriot Front. These guys have an extensive like org chart for what they are. And, some of that's necessary. But some of that to me strikes me as guys like Rousseau trying to keep his top people on board by giving them titles and, shiny things like that. And they just can't seem to get their head around the idea that anti-fascism isn't really something anyone gets paid to do or has a job doing. It's you see something, you say something. You see something, you do something. And you don't necessarily wait around for, some group to come around and tell you how to do it. You just pick up the ball.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what you're touching on there is really important, which is that I think a good way to think about fascism and anti-fascism and how they're opposed is that fascists are enthralled by hierarchy, and
Yes.
they want to do everything to maintain hierarchy, whereas anarchists are very explicitly anti-hierarchical. They want to make decisions democratically and horizontally.
Yes.
I think it was really interesting thinking about this with hierarchy when I was looking at an old catalog of the Second Klan, and it was a catalog for robes and hoods, and they had different robes and hoods for every level of Klansmen.
Oh, yes.
And they were like, and you could see the degree to which they kind of fetishize these levels of being in a group, these ranks. So I think it's a really an astute point that you're making, which is that it's hard for these far right groups to fathom that Antifa doesn't have leaders and it's not an organization that's decentralized. Right. Because for the most part, that's not how they operate, and the world they want to create has very strict hierarchies.
Yes.
That are based on essentialized identities.
Well, and I think this is why they're leaning so hard into trying to find any foreign sources of funding for any left-wing activism that's going on in this country, because they're looking to somehow make this a foreign terrorist organization, like we saw with Terrorgram, like we saw with a lot of the online groups like the Base. The reason why these groups were able to be designated per se is because they found linkage between these various groups and people overseas who were doing the same kind of stuff, and it's a little easier to point to. So you're seeing very thin, shall we say, reasoning for making these statements, like some group in Utah had a couple of its members go to Cuba. Who knows who this group even is? I've never heard of these guys, and they're obviously not big enough to be obviously on the scale of like Patriot Front or something. It kind of sounds like maybe 5 people with guns in Salt Lake City, honestly, from the sounds of this.
Right.
But they point to the fact that those people went to Cuba and said, look, it's the Cubans that are financing all of this stuff. And it's kind of like, if we're not allowed to say that the Russians are financing things because all of these people used to go there back and forth all the time, but we can't necessarily prove it beyond that, then why are they doing the same thing? Because they really can't prove any of this, it seems like. And this is just not how the groups work. This is just anybody who tried to put an organizational structure like Patriot Front on an anti-fascist group would get laughed out of the room.
Oh, of course.
This is not the kind of people that are attracted to these groups. And it blows me away that they can't see that.
Yeah, and it's also, from my experience talking to anti-fascists and people doing this work, like they don't have any money.
Exactly.
and the money they do have, they're kind of fundraising from each other.
It's the same $5 everybody's sending back to everybody's Patreon every month,
No, exactly. Yeah. And I think like even, this is something I think a lot of journalists have had to put up with too, if you're on the left, is constantly being accused of being funded by like George Soros.
Oh, exactly.
And it's like, well, I mean, I would love a Soros paycheck, but
right.
like I've never gotten one.
What's up, man? Right.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think, they'll definitely try to dig up shit like that. And of course, like, anti-fascist groups in North America are talking to anti-fascist groups in Europe, and they're meeting each other occasionally, sure. But to make that into material support is absurd.
And that's what I think they were trying to set a precedent with Cop City, was anytime anybody contributes any amount of money or any level of support, they're going to try and get a conviction out of that under a RICO charge. Because if they can do that, then they can get everybody. If they can figure out a way to charge, you gave $5 to somebody's mutual aid, you're now looking at RICO. Not only are you going to be able to bust a whole ton of people for that, but you're going to chill everybody else? Because if you know that you can be prosecuted for this by that or for that, then you're going to think real hard about having anything to do with any of these groups, because the vast majority of people don't really want to go to jail. They don't want to end up in some kind of legal trouble, because even if you're right, you still have to hire a lawyer. Even if you're right, it's going to cost you money. You're going to have to spend
Yeah.
like a lot of your life dealing with this. And they know that, which is, part of the reason they eventually do it. I mean, it's how they got microchip to flip on, Doug Mackey. But anyway, here and there, they essentially want to dissuade people from that kind of activism at all. And like you said, most of the people in anti-fascism don't really have any money. They are coming from an anarchist background, in a lot of cases a punk rock background, where they're used to working like that. The idea that there's no money is kind of like, this is just the way of the world. If you want to do these kinds of projects or you want to do these kinds of activism, no one's ever going to pay you for it. There's no corporate sponsor that's going to be intrigued by any of the stuff that you're actually accomplishing. This doesn't make any business's life better. You kind of just have to do it because you want to see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, this is something I get into in the book. Like, none of these people, they're doing so much work. It's like a second job, and they are not getting paid for it. No one knows they're doing it. They're not doing it for any kind of glory or fame. They're doing it behind a pseudonym. They're doing it because they honestly think it's a form of community self-defense.
Yeah.
And of all the people I talked to, they were all working class or middle class. And I think this kind of dovetails with how, the work they're doing. When I expose a Nazi for a publication, it goes through a legal review, like we talked about.
Yeah.
So I have a First Amendment lawyer at my disposal to do that. They don't, when anti-fascists do this. Like when they dock someone, they can't afford a lawyer. So, which kind of creates this atmosphere of really exacting editorial standards. Like they know they have to get everything right.
Right.
And
you're not going to be able to survive a lawsuit. You're not going to be able to survive it if somebody gets a hold of your identity and decides to sue you for publishing this. You have to have everything absolutely bulletproof, sources and references and the whole 9 yards for this. Whereas maybe they don't have to be so careful, because the people they're talking about, for the most part, aren't going to sue them anyway, even if they're wrong. Nobody wants to deal with this, and nobody really has the money to try and file a lawsuit. I mean, they can complain all they want to about lawfare, but if you look at who's actually doing this, it's for the most part not the left. This just isn't the way this works. And I find myself thinking that the things that have gone on in this country in the last 6 months have really scared them. The idea that there's this protest movement that's picking up where 2020 left off, and it's just coming out and nobody's really directing this thing. I think that scares the shit out of them. And that's why you're seeing this push to label it as this is a Soros thing. Soros is doing this. And it's anger. It's people that are just had enough of this stuff. And they look at the Democratic Party and they're like, you told us this previous election that if Trump got in, this was an existential crisis, that democracy was going to die, that we were going to have fascism. And then he gets elected and all of you are like, oh, well, nevertheless, we'll just move on to the next election. And that's just not good enough. You gave these people the truth, as far as I'm concerned, that things are going to get drastically worse real fast. But then you expect them to just act like it's business as usual going forward until the next election. And I think people are over that the same way the right wing was over it after years of Romney, Ryan, McCain, all of these guys promising red meat and giving them tax cuts. These guys were all listening to Rush Limbaugh. These people were listening to Michael Savage. They were getting very into the idea of we want a vengeance on these people. And then it never actually happened, no matter which Republican you vote for or which Republican you elect. They didn't do that kind of stuff up until Trump. And these people know the difference. And I think you're starting to see something similar with people that are more mainstream Democrats. They're starting to realize that no matter what happens, these people aren't going to push back on any rational level. They're not going to try and make that kind of change happen, because it's going to hurt them worse than almost anybody if they do it. So I think what we're seeing at this point is, a movement they don't understand and they definitely can't control. Nobody's really controlling things right now. So they're looking for ways to slow this down. And this prosecution is definitely one of those things that they're going to try and do, hoping to
Yeah.
knock some people out of what might be activism as a result.
Yeah. Right. And I think, I think what you're saying is exactly right. And also, when you look at the past anti-Antifa panics, especially in 2020,
Yep.
The way the right was blaming the uprisings on Antifa was a way of delegitimizing them and saying that they weren't authentic, that they
Yeah.
were the work of like leftist outside agitators. And it was also a way of sowing division among those taking part in the uprisings, because all of a sudden there was this debate over, the radical portions of the uprising and the more liberal centrist portions of the uprising.
Yes.
And I think, that's somewhat, again, what we're seeing, but the goalposts are always moving, and what's considered Antifa, just keeps, eventually, Nancy Pelosi will be Antifa. Like, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, they've already accused her of being Antifa.
They've already called her Antifa. Yeah.
They've accused all of these people at one time or another. It really has turned into a anyone you don't like type of criteria. And if you can get people scared to go near it because you have been able to tag them as terrorists and say that, you're going to be investigated, you're going to be hassled if you do any of this kind of stuff, I think that does put a lot of people off who might be ready to, go do that kind of work. So it's good that you're writing and putting this out there as hey, these people have it completely wrong. What these people think is going on here is not what's going on here. And I could explain this to them chapter and verse with an entire book, but they're not going to get it because they're not going to read it and they're not going to believe it anyway if they do. So might as well try and target the people who are out there who haven't necessarily made up their minds about any of this kind of stuff yet.
Yeah, I think if I'm honest, I think a lot of times when I was writing this book, I could hear myself trying to explain Antifa to my parents in my head. And I think that is, to a degree, what I was trying to do, was like trying to demystify Antifa for a lot of people that, who might have left of center, liberal, centrist beliefs,
right?
Who have really kind of bought the idea of Antifa as like these out of control radicals.
Sure.
Yeah. And so I think to a degree, like, I'm trying to demystify what Antifa is and make, I think, anarchism, socialism, communism a little more palatable and understandable. And also some of the tactics they use, that Antifa uses to fight the far right. And basically to say that there's a history with these tactics and they didn't come out of nowhere, and that these tactics have a history of success.
And I think that that's something that needs to get emphasized, is because once the fascists, and we can just call them that now as far as I'm concerned, guys like Pasobic who write endless books about how, Pinochet and Francisco Franco were actually like misunderstood and didn't do anything wrong. I think you start endorsing those guys and we can call you a fascist and not feel too bad about it, or like we might be somehow misjudging you. But I think that basically you kind of want to counter that perception. You want to go out there and say, no, that's how these guys see it because that's what they do. This can be anything from, spending a few hours a week looking at photos that you see in articles and trying to piece together, okay, so who were the people that were at Charlottesville? Let's start looking at the photos of Charlottesville. Look at how fast some of those people got identified. And part of that is because there were a lot of anti-fascists who didn't have, the encumbrance of having to necessarily work it out in public. They were able to, go do that research and be like, hey, that's this guy from North Carolina over here who is a member of this and he works here and there. And we're really seeing how important the anonymity is to both sides. There are people who work above ground, and I think we're obviously an example of that. But then there's a lot of people who, every so often you get these emails from people, and I don't know names. I don't want to know names. I don't want to know who you are, but I'll check out what you send me. But I've gotten stuff from people that's like, wow, I'm not sure I want to know how you got this. I'm not sure
Yeah.
I want to know how you did this, but you did this, and this is very cool. And if I can corroborate this, then we'll talk about it. But there's definitely a level of let's conflate that with black bloc on the right. Let's tell everybody that Antifa is guys blocked up out there trashing cars, burning things down. I mean, this is Seattle. We've gotten that kind of stuff every year pretty much since the general strike in 1919. There's always been a
Right.
protest culture here that is prepared to get very loud and very aggro if certain buttons are pushed. And we've seen that here. People understand that it feels like an existential threat. And so they're going to push back on it like it was an existential threat.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think a lot of what we're seeing right now with the GOP and the second Trump administration is very much a response to the uprisings of 2020. Like, I think we all forget, I can't believe it was already 5 years ago, but like that, like what a revolutionary summer that was. In a
Oh,
way.
yeah.
Like there was, I live in New York, obviously, and like you could not walk a few blocks without running into a demonstration for a while. It was, you saw, I remember where I was in Brooklyn at the time, it was pretty common to see a cop car in flames. Um, and, um, and like, it was a real like revolutionary rupture. And I think a lot of people gained like a new understanding and consciousness and were radicalized by that summer.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I think that scared the shit out of a lot of powerful people. And I think like when you look at history, there is a vicious reactionary backlash to moments of Black advancement. And I think this fascist moment we're having should be understood in that context as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you look back at 2008 and things got a whole lot more racist when Obama got elected. Everybody thought, oh, look, Obama got elected. We're post-racial now. Nope. That was one of the more, shall we say, wishful thinking projections I think I remember. And all it did was make all the existing racists really mad. And all of a sudden they had to get radicalized about it. So, yeah, and you look back, you're right. You see that sort of thing happening all the way back to Reconstruction, the Klan being a response in the first place to Reconstruction, to Black people all of a sudden having rights in this area and being made full members of society. The Klan couldn't handle that. So they did what they do. And it's interesting because that does raise the question of like, how do we deal with this root cause that seems to be just almost straight up racism on the part of these people?
Well, I mean, that's $1 million question, obviously, but I think, I think when you talk to anarchists and socialists and people who've done kind of militant anti-fascist work, they will say ultimately, Antifa, militant anti-fascist work, is one tactic in a much larger project. And that larger project is ultimately the overthrowing capitalism, because they see racism very much as a creation of capitalism, as a way of it's essentially a method of dividing and conquering, where people in power with hoarding the wealth will tell you that it's not the problem that they're hoarding all the wealth. It's that your neighbor is Black, or your neighbor is trans, your neighbor is an immigrant. And so I think like that is ultimately the like structural kind of critique that anarchists and anti-fascists will make. And I think it's a critique that certainly resonates with me.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, it resonates with the kids. You look at every survey they've done in the last, decade almost, and the younger people who didn't come up under some idealized version of capitalism, didn't come up even, I'm Gen X, right? We still sort of bought it to some extent. But I think everybody after me kind of has looked at the way capitalism has left the world and their world and said, maybe we don't need to do this anymore. Maybe we can come up with a fairer way. Maybe we need to spend some of society's massive amounts of resources on people who can't make it under this system. Maybe
Yeah.
we don't need billionaires. Maybe
Yeah.
somebody should take Jeff Bezos out and, like, you know, seize his bank account and end poverty with it or something.
I mean, I think like, I think that is also one of the kind of undertold stories of the last 10 years, is that there was this kind of awakening or mass radicalization on the left too, like of people who might have been more normie Democrats maybe, who kind of came to understood, or came to embrace like a socialist perspective maybe, or join DSA,
Right.
And like that is certainly a real phenomenon, and I think part and parcel of, you know, a lot of the people I talked to for the book, you know, I talked to like 60 anti-fascist activists, and a lot of them were radicalized by certain events. One was Trump's election, the second was Charlottesville, and then third was the uprisings in 2020. Fourth was January 6th. And these kind of like seismic events that upended their political worldview and made them rethink stuff. So I think like, I don't know, man. I think a lot of people are adjusting their worldviews and maybe, you know, becoming a little more radical.
And I think it's interesting you brought up January 6th, because I really think that the Trump administration kind of thought they could just pardon everybody and make it all go away. They just were going to pardon everybody, and then it didn't happen. But I can tell you that nobody on this side has forgotten it. The footage is still there. We've all seen what happened. We all know what happened. Just because you let these people out of jail doesn't mean they didn't actually do any of this kind of stuff. And that, I think, also helped radicalize, like you said, a lot of people, especially the more normie Democrats, because they've realized that, like, these people literally launched a strike at the heart of America. You can't really look at it any other way. And they served maybe a year in prison, maybe. They saw virtually no consequences for it. Most of them got locked into the, you know, the same cell or the same kind of wing of the DC jail, and they ended up basically starting their own little radical group in there. None of these people did hard time at all for this. And as a result, people see it and they're kind of like, okay, well, if that's the game they're playing now, then I think I have to go over on this other side and do what I can to, you know, eliminate that. So you said the book's coming out in February. How can people support you besides pre-ordering that, which again, you should go over to Simon & Schuster, pre-order To Catch a Fascist by Chris Mathias. It should be in your inbox, you know, as soon as it gets out. But what else are you doing with your time these days now that you're done with this?
Yeah, sure. So I left HuffPost earlier this year and have gone freelance. So you can catch me occasionally in The Guardian and MSNBC, and I'll be. I wrote an article for Zateo actually about January 6th. Earlier this summer, and I'm going to be writing for them again. But otherwise, catch me on Blue Sky at Let's Go Mathias, and I'm on the Nazi site under the same handle, although I don't really post there much anymore.
Yeah, same.
But I am considering posting there a little more about the book. We'll see.
Right. And there's a good reason for that. You know, I mean, I've heard the argument like, let's not give Elon the publicity. Well, posting about this isn't going to make Elon or anybody else over there very happy. This is the kind of thing that's going to really piss them off, and it might help get the word out about what this is. So that's a perfectly valid use of the Nazi platform as far as I'm concerned.
I think so too.
If you can...
but yeah, in the meantime, like you said, please pre-order the book. I think it's good. I'm proud of it.
You got a newsletter? You doing a newsletter?
I don't, but maybe I should.
You should. You absolutely should. Don't use Substack because, as you know, they don't support nice people. And if you start something with Substack, it's kind of a pain in the ass to move off of Substack once you've done it. So I would highly suggest, if you do a newsletter, and I think you should, don't use Substack. Use anything else. Anything else. It's convenient,
that's a great idea. I remember I emailed Substack a lot for the Richard Hanania story last year or 2 years ago, because he was a Nazi, but he was using Substack, and they never responded.
No, they don't. And they haven't, and they won't. I mean, they got guys like Matt Parrott from, you know, freaking Traditionalist
I mean,
Workers Party. They all
Richard
have
Spencer's
some
on there, isn't he?
Yeah, I think he is. I don't
Yeah.
think he writes very often, but he's on it. Richard
Yeah.
Hanania is still on it. Although Richard Hanania has kind of almost started sounding like a normie Democrat, if you can ignore the racism lately. He's really
Well,
not
yeah.
happy with any of how this is going. And it's kind of like, well, we told you. We told you this was going to suck. All of us did.
Yeah.
So, you know, he's not the only one on that side of the fence that has serious reservations about what they did, but I don't feel like it's my job to reassure them at this point. I did all of
No,
that.
totally.
I said
Yeah, totally not.
before,
Yeah.
when there was still something we could have done about it. I said,
Yeah.
hey, don't do this. Don't do this. He's going to screw you too. That's just how he is. But no, you had to do it.
Yep. You had to do it.
You're all so smart. You all went to Duke or something like that. And you all have, you know, these great degrees and you're smarter than me. Just,
Yeah.
fuck. Well, hey, thank you, Chris. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. I can't wait to read the book. This is something, like I said, I've been looking forward to since, you know, the first time you came on the show. And I'm really glad you're still out there doing this kind of work. I mean, a lot of the people who have been doing this kind of work since then, because it's been, you know, 8 years of this kind of thing. And eventually that gets to you. People see that and they're just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to do something else for a while, reset my brain, which is totally fair and totally understandable. So it's good to look out and see that people who have been there that long and have that continuity of like, I know what I'm dealing with because I've reported on this stuff for 8 years. I know who these people are. I know what they do. So
I
thank you
really
for sticking
appreciate that,
around.
Griff. Thank you. And right back at you. I think I don't begrudge anyone for
Yeah, me either.
leaving this beat. Sometimes I joke that my next book will be about covering soccer in the Caribbean or something.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Maybe.
Plenty of things I'd like to, you know, write a book about or talk about that don't have anything to do with this, but here we are. To some extent,
exactly.
This is what needs to be covered. And I don't think any of us expected to take, you know, Jello Biafra's admonition about don't hate the media, become the media quite as literally. But again, nobody else is doing it. And I think that you saw that too. Like somebody has to pick up the ball. Otherwise, this stuff's not going to get covered. People out in the middle of the country aren't necessarily going to know the shit these people pull. So we have to cover that ourselves and hopefully get the word out well enough that people can see it and decide they don't want to deal with it in their town as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Griff. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate you, man. Have a great rest of your day and stay safe out there, okay?
All right, you too, man. Take care.